This is the database creation tutorial. In this database creation tutorial, we're going to focus specifically on using the database creation wizard, which is designed to help you create a custom database quickly. If you're interested in advanced or expert creation of a database, including the ability to import from a CSV file, a comma separated values file that you might have exported from Excel or another database, then we'd encourage you to look at the database creation tutorial focused on the expert creation guide. What we're going to do here is we've opened up the program and we're going to be creating a custom badge database using the quick launch wizard at the beginning. So we're going to go ahead and select create a custom badge database. Now, because creating a database is a high level operation, the very next thing that the system is going to do is going to ask you to log in. So when you go ahead and click on next, you're going to get up the security information. As we have mentioned in other tutorials, the default username and password of master and ID card are there to allow you to get in quickly and easily, particularly if security isn't a particular option or concern for you. However, we would encourage you still to think strongly about changing that, because remembering that your database is information that allows people to generate cards, you don't want somebody who is not supposed to be authorized to be on your site to be able to generate a card for themselves. However, we're going to complete the login process here using the defaults of master and ID card. That allows us, as soon as we put in a right password, to log in. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Again, this is now the database creation wizard, and we are going to use this creation wizard to go through the process. So we're going to go ahead and say next. The very first thing that we need to do is to give our database a name. So since this is a tutorial, we're going to call the database tutorial. BadgeBuilder has the ability to store your fingerprints, photos, and signatures in two different ways. One of them is to store them out as individual files just out on your system. Another one of them is to actually store them right in the same database where all of the rest of your other information, such as name, ID number, and so forth, are going to be stored. There is no right or wrong answer here. If you're not sure, you could always talk to your IT person. The default is to save it as files, and if you really have no preference, then we would suggest that you just not check the next item down here and proceed with it, doing it as files. So if you're happy, you can go ahead and say next. Now, this part of the database creation wizard allows you to create fields. Now, why do we need fields? We need fields because we want to be able to capture data for each individual that we want to create a card for. That's going to be something like first name, last name, address, phone number, position in the company, any kind of personal information that you'd like to collect and keep, or that you'd like to display on the card when you create that card and print it for that individual. BadgeBuilder allows you to create any number of different types of fields, including alphanumeric fields, date fields, time fields, number fields, and it also has a counter field which you won't enter anything, it will just automatically increment a number so that each individual gets a unique identification number. So the other thing that you can do with this piece is, if you have not really sure what you're going to be using for fields, one of the things that we've done is actually provided you a predefined set of fields that you can use that uses the kind of information that I just discussed, including name and address and so forth. But let's go through the process now of actually creating some fields ourselves. As you'll see right at the moment, the screen up here is blank because we don't have any fields, and we can't proceed until we have at least one. So let's go through and just take a quick look at some of the fields that we could create. So we'll create a field called name. Now, we might ask, why is it that there is an item called name and then an alias? Well, that's because, unfortunately, in databases, some databases restrict some of the words that you can use. And so what happens is, if the field is not allowed, we actually have to force you to use something slightly different. But in order to make it so that everything displays the way that you want, we allowed you to create what's called aliases. So if you try to use a field and it's not allowed, you can give it a somewhat different or modified name, but then give it the real name that you'd like in the alias area, and that will actually create your field exactly the way that you want. So down here I could actually use something like person's name as the alias, and then when I see it in the application and I see it throughout BadgeBuilder, it's going to say person's name, even though the actual field in the underlying data is actually just called name. Now I know that I want to capture alphanumeric, which is information that includes A to Z and 0 through 9 and a few symbols. If the field length of 40, which is the default, is sufficient, that means it will allow for a name of up to 40 characters long. If that's sufficient, then you can just leave it. If you'd really like to make certain that it's a little bit longer and accommodates a very long name, you can change that length to be any number that you like, up to 255 characters. The fields in the database don't allow longer than 255 characters. So we're going to go ahead now, and now that we've defined something, we're going to go ahead and say add. And now we've got a field. There's our field name. Here's the alias for it. The type is alphanumeric. Again, A through Z, 0 through 9, and some symbols, and a length of 80. Now it's left this predefined information in case it's something that we'd like to use again. In this case we don't, so what we'll do in this case is now we'll create another field called ID number. Now I'm hitting the space bar right now, but you see there are no spaces coming out, and that's because spaces aren't allowed in database field names. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a field called ID number. But then down in our alias, I'm going to create a field. And again, as you can see here in the aliasing, you can have a space, you can have upper and lower case, and it will honor all of those things. Now, this is going to be a numeric field. We only want it to be allowed to have 0 through 9. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to change that from alphanumeric to numeric. The only option that you have when you change to numeric is places, and this is referring in this case to decimal places. And for the most part, people don't end up using decimal places, but if you do need them, then obviously you can specify them here. We're not going to. We're going to leave this at 0, so we're going to go ahead and hit add. If the last field that we wanted to create was some sort of identification that was a counter field, or we wanted to create a date field, what we can do is we can create a, let's do an expiration date. So I can put expiration date in here, and I can say expires down here. Dates are actually a subset of alphanumeric fields, so we're going to actually go over and we're going to hit date. And you'll see that all these other items go away. And I'm going to go ahead and say add. Okay, so now we have a very simple database. It has some basic fields, name, ID number, and an expiration date. You can create many more fields for whatever it is that you need, but we're going to just go with what we have here right now. If you need to make a change, you can go up and select on any one of these fields, and you'll see that the information comes up. You can then click update if you wish, or if one of these fields is not right, you can say delete, or if you really need to start all over again, you can say delete all and begin from the start again. In this case, we're happy with the selections that we've made, so we're going to go ahead and say next. Now, for the purposes of this particular exercise, we're going to assume that you have already created a badge design that you're happy with. The program comes with a number of predefined canned badge designs, but it's likely that you'll want to have modified those to be specific to your particular organization, business, etc. So what we're going to be doing here is picking from a number of different templates, and you're getting a preview over here to do that with. So I can go ahead and I can click through, and you'll see that there are a number of different, like I said, canned card designs that we've provided. And we'll stick with the original one. If you have created what's called a CTM file, which is a card template file that BadgeBuilder recognizes it natively, and it is somewhere not in this list, and it's somewhere else, perhaps on a network drive, on a thumb drive, CD, however you might have it, you can browse for that by clicking on the Browse button, and this will allow you to actually go to the folder where that CTM file exists, or multiple CTMs, and then those will be displayed. In our case, we're going to select this particular one, which is the credit card no ban, and then we're going to go ahead and say next. And we're almost there. It's going to give us some very basic information about what it is that it's gathered, and then if we're happy with the information, we're going to go ahead and hit finish. Now the final step in this process is that we have a card design, and we now have some fields from a database, but we need to make the two things work together. The information from the database can be presented on the card in an area that you specify. And so what this information, this final step is a process of associating the fields from the database with the fields on the card, and so when you enter a record in the database, the information shows up on the card. So we acknowledge this message, and we're given up what's called the field assignments dialog. Now, right at the moment, all of the fields that we have on there are just represented with some placeholders, just some numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Any of those can be used to display information that we wish to display instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up and we're actually going to click on this very first one with our tool. And when we do, we're provided with the database field assignment dialog. The database field assignment dialog has multiple capabilities. You can select a field from the database, which we're going to do in this case. We're going to go down and hit add right next to person's name. And you'll see the current assignment goes up there. If I'm not happy with that, I can just hit backspace and I can get rid of it. Other thing that we can do that's a very powerful feature is the ability to do what's called concatenation. Concatenation allows you to take multiple fields from the database and put them all in one field on the card, or one rectangle on the card. You can also take and put some what's called fixed text along with some variable text. In this case, the person's name is variable text. It's information that's going to change from card to card to card depending upon the information that's in the database. However, we might want to have some fixed information that says something along the lines of, "Hi, my name is," and then a space. And what's going to happen in that situation is that it's always going to put out the words, "Hi, my name is," and then it's going to fill in the blank. It's going to fill it in with whatever the person's name is. So that's a really capable feature, something that you can use to combine static or fixed information on your card with information that's going to change from badge to badge. The other thing that this allows you to do is to do a little bit of customized formatting on the internally to a particular card design. Under normal circumstances, when you designed your card, you were able to specify whether you wanted that content to be bold or not, italic or not, a particular size, a particular color. But sometimes what you want to have is to be able to actually define that at a more finely grained level. For instance, you might want to say something along the lines of, "Hi, my name is," and perhaps you'd like that to be underlined. And so what you can do is you can actually put in what basically amounts to some little tags here by clicking on that at the beginning of what I want to have underlined and then changing it to not underlined. Now this is a little bit technical, but what it essentially does is allows you to basically say the "Hi, my name is" portion is going to be underlined, but the person's name is not, and you'll see the result of that in a few moments. We're going to go ahead and say OK, and there's the result of what we talked about. The underlining is there for that piece. Now the person's name, the field may not be big enough to show the person's whole name, and that's a factor of what the card design is. So if that ends up becoming an issue, not a problem at all. When your database is complete, you can go back in and you can do some card revisions that will allow you to modify it so that it does fit it correctly. Let's go ahead and finish now and go through the rest of these fields, and we're going to go ahead and click on the next field down. And I'm going to select from the available fields in the database. I'm going to select the ID number, and I'm going to say OK, and there's my ID number. And then in this field, I'm going to select the expiration, but before I do, I'm going to say expires, and a colon and a space, and then I'm going to come down to the available fields, and I'm going to select expires. Okay. Now, for this particular field, what I might want to do is to just put into this field just the fixed information about the industry that I'm in. So let's just put in a name and say OK. And then finally, in our bottom field down here, we'll look for some other information to talk about. For instance, the user information. The user information is something that you can define in the configuration of the program. It's fixed information, but you fill it in like a form, such as a company name, the street, the city, the state, the zip code, some basic content information that you can fill in as part of the configuration, and that field information is available to you as well. So, for instance, if we go down and we select that we want the city, the name of the city that the organization is in, we can select that from the user information and say OK, and now the city will come up down here. So we've gone through the process of filling each of these pieces of information in. We've replaced the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the placeholder empty boxes that were on the card with real information, some of it coming from the database, some of it being fixed for each particular one. If you need to make changes to the card design at this point, as far as you're not happy with the colors, the photos, and so forth, don't worry about that. Just save the changes for the actual assignments of the fields right now, because you'll always be able to go back and make further changes to the card design once the database is created. When we're happy, we're going to go ahead and say save. And the last thing that we have to do is to give the card a name. Now, it's going to suggest the name that came from the card template file, which is what came from the prior step. You can use that if you like, or you can change it to something totally different. This is no longer a file. Basically, what's happening is this card design is being pulled in from that template and being made part of the database, and so it needs to know what you'd like to call it inside of the database. So what I might want to do is call this Acme employee card. If I'm happy with the card design name, I can go ahead and say OK. Very quickly, what you'll find is that the card design comes up, the database has now been created, the fields are all there, and so forth. And just to prove that point and follow it through to the end, we'll go through and add one record in here in which we put a person's name in. We put in an ID number 12345, and we can say that it expires on 12/31/2012. We have our card design, and we say OK. And now we have, hi, my name is John. The dough part didn't fit. Again, going into card design, the other information, the expiration date, and so forth. The name of the city didn't come out because we haven't defined the city, but we'll get into that in another tutorial. That's the process for creating a database creation, doing database creation using the wizard. Very, very straightforward. It's something that you can use to create as many databases as you need to.